I'm Sharif Kouddous from Dropside News, dropsidenews.com. Welcome to our regular Tuesday morning live stream. I'm joining you at a time when Israel's war of extermination in Gaza continues to plunge to new depths of horror. Already today, over 50 Palestinians have been killed by the Israeli military across Gaza since dawn, including 14 people killed while trying to seek aid. The level of the military assault, combined with the prolonged siege and blockades of food, the daily murder of people seeking aid, has really brought Gaza to a tipping point. Just to give you a sense of the level of the killing, this also is happening with expanded ground operations and continued aerial assault. Over 600 people have been killed over the past 6 days alone. Starving Palestinians have begun to collapse in the streets and die of hunger. Multiple reports have documented people sifting through garbage, scraping spilled food from the ground, eating trash from the streets. The health ministry in Gaza has reported unprecedented numbers of starving people of all ages arriving at emergency rooms in a state of extreme exhaustion and fatigue. People are extremely parched because there's no water to drink. And on Sunday, the health ministry issued a bulletin saying that 18 Palestinians had died from starvation over the past day alone. And just a few hours ago from this broadcast, they issued another bulletin saying that an additional 15 people, including 4 children, had died due to famine and malnutrition over the past day. So the number of people who have died since the beginning of the genocide as a result of hunger is now over 100, including 80 children. Children, of course, being much more vulnerable. Palestinians in Gaza also are now forced to make this impossible choice of having to face death from starvation or being killed as they try to obtain some meager rations from these so-called aid distribution hubs. People are gunned down every single day as they try and get food. They have to travel long distances, mostly in the far south of Gaza, to reach these so-called distribution hubs run by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is a US and Israeli-backed group. And one of the deadliest days for aid seekers came just on Sunday, when nearly 80 people were killed in northern Gaza when Israeli troops opened fire on crowds trying to get food from a World Food Program convoy that entered through the Zikim crossing. Even the World Food Program issued a rare condemnation, saying the crowd that approached the convoy came under fire from Israeli tanks, snipers, and other gunfire, and that, quote, these people were simply trying to access food to feed themselves and their families on the brink of starvation, end quote. We filed a story at Dropside yesterday about all of this. The reporter who worked on the story from Gaza, Abdel Sabah, he told me that he had only eaten half a loaf of bread that day. He finds it very hard. He's extremely weakened and finds it hard to stand on his own 2 feet. Over the past 2 months, more than 1,000 Palestinians have been killed as they try and get in these so-called aid massacres, as they try and get food to feed their families. And this all comes as the Israeli military is further expanding its ground operations, carving up Gaza with military corridors and forcing displaced Palestinians into more concentrated zones. As it stands, nearly 90% of Gaza is now under displacement orders or inside so-called Israeli military zones. So yesterday, for the first time since the beginning of the genocide, Israeli troops pushed into areas of Deir al-Balah in central Gaza. Now, Deir al-Balah is the only city in Gaza that had not been subject to a major Israeli ground operation or suffered the kind of widespread devastation that we've seen in every single other city in Gaza. So this attack on Deir al-Balah yesterday came alongside a displacement order issued by the Israeli military that stretched through the southern part of the city all the way to the coastline, effectively cutting off Deir al-Balah and cities in 2 cities in the south, Khan Yunis and Rafah. So Deir al-Balah is where many Palestinians have sought refuge, as their cities and neighborhoods have been attacked and destroyed multiple times. It's also where the headquarters of several UN agencies and medical NGOs are based. The UN Human Rights Chief, Volker Turk, today condemned the attack on Deir al-Balah, saying, quote, "It seemed the nightmare couldn't possibly get worse, and yet it does," end quote. Israeli forces also raided the main staff residence of the World Health Organization in Deir al-Balah, forcing women and children to evacuate on foot, to displace on foot towards the coast. And male staff and family members were handcuffed, stripped, interrogated, screened at gunpoint. The WHO said its main warehouse in the city was damaged by an explosion and a fire. So we're going to talk about all of this, and we're going to go first to Deir al-Balah, where we're fortunate to be joined by Eyad al-Amawi, a representative of the Gaza Relief Committee and a coordinator for local NGOs. Eyad, thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell us what is happening right now in Deir al-Balah, where you're speaking to us from? What is the situation? Hi, Eyad, can you hear me? I think he may have just frozen. We'll see if we can try and get him back. Eyad is a frequent guest on the program, and he was just on last week. And I have been in touch with him recently as he's been sending updates from Deir al-Balah about the attack on the city, a place where he is based. Let's see if we can try and get him back. He's trying to refresh. Of course, hi, Eyad, can you hear me? I think we lost him again. Israeli forces have also deliberately, multiple times, cut off the fiber cables that provide internet to parts of the Gaza Strip. We've seen internet blackouts happen on a frequent basis. Connectivity is never great. There have been times when it's gone down to zero and people are forced to rely on eSIMs and try and get the Israeli network to try and get some kind of connectivity. But we were speaking with him just before the broadcast. Hopefully we'll be able to get him back. Well, what we can do instead of starting in Gaza, we can turn to another guest that we are fortunate to have with us, Mouin Rabbani. He's the co-editor of Jadaleya and is a former special advisor on Israel-Palestine for the International Crisis Group, joining us from Montreal. Mouin, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes. I think your camera might need to be turned on. Hold on. We may have gotten Eyad back. Sorry for all this confusion.
Yeah. The internet is very weak. I apologize, but we cannot access it all of the time for the internet, you know.
Well, go ahead, Eyad. While we have you, can please describe what's the latest happening in Deir al-Balah as you understand it, and what's the situation like?
Yeah. Firstly, thank you, Sharif, for your hosting, and my colleagues also. The situation in Deir al-Balah, the last update, the Israeli news mentioned the Israeli incursion is ended now after 24 hours. They do some military actions in the southeast part of the Deir al-Balah. Until this moment, our civilians can't reach that region, and some of them is a volunteer worked with the paramedics. They withdraw some bodies and casualties from there. We have more than 13 martyrs and more than 25 casualties in Deir al-Balah. And that region is still under the red zone. The drones is flying, and war plans there. No one can reach their homes or their lands to return to the maybe 3 general camps. All of the displacement people now is expelled in the street with no destination to go, and with no affordable amount of food also, like all of the Gaza Strip. So the situation in Deir al-Balah is unstable. We cannot trust the Israeli news about ending the operation there. Maybe they will again and again do something like that with other regions. They still committing massacres. So the situation in Deir al-Balah is we have fears to do something like what happened in Khan Yunis with the complete cleansing and Rafah also, Sharif. So this fears is a high level in our mind. We know very well what the Israeli did there, and they hoped in their media to cleansing Deir al-Balah, the last region, the Mediterranean or the middle governance here is very shrinked. The ordinary day we have just width 6 kilometers, Sharif. So you can imagine when we have more than 500,000 people gathered here in the coastal area, in the middle governance, with no foods. Also, we sieged by two corridor, Netzarim corridor, and the new corridor they mentioned they will establish if they continue their operation between Khan Yunis and Deir al-Balah. So the situation is here is more worsened, more horrible than other regions because there is no exits from here and no foods that let the trucks come in without restrictions. Last night, the WFP and the group of families agreed to let the trucks come into the all of the governance without any attacks from the civilians. But until this moment, the Israeli refused to implement any promises that agreed between the Israeli and European Union. The situation is worsening more and more. I can't imagine how can I talk about our babies and children. They lose their lives by the time. The thirst threats also with the lack of the sweet water, Sharif, is more horrible than the foods shortage also. Because there is no sweet water really. Most of our water is populated with the population's ingredients because the sewage is invaded every pipelines after the construction every infrastructure here. The situation and circumstances also is worse and become complex more and more. My colleagues, she's worked now with the ER in the Sharif hospital, mentioned to me yesterday night they received more than 50 martyrs and more than 150 injuries from the Eyad massacres that committed at the Zakim in the northeast region in the Gaza Strip. Our people here is still trying to obtain any amount of foods. They seek foods at any regions. The GHF warehouses, they distribute death. We mentioned that before. So Deir al-Balah now and the middle governance is under completely sieged. And also you can add the famine and the starvation that's long more than 100 days. So this is situation, Sharif and my colleagues, I cannot describe and unbearable for us to stand and to have any resilience for this. Our society, we know and recognize the Israeli aims that they need to cause us completely exhausted and completely destroyed. They reshaping everything, reshaping psychologically, geographically, they reshaping everything in Gaza. As a citizen here for more than 20 years in Gaza, when I walk and go through any roads before the war, I didn't know my destination really. Everything is completely destroyed. The infrastructure is destroyed. No region stay as it before the war. So the situation here, the Israeli need to reshape Gaza and regenerate a new shape of the life. They need from the war to normalize seeing the death by the famine as they normalize the people and the world to see the death by war plans and tanks and invasions and incursions, something like that. So the new plan, I touched that in their medias and their actions over the ground, they need to normalize us to accept the death by famine, especially between us. So this is a horrible situation. The last stage that can be stands is to face the famine. It's not easy for us. We have a resilience on all of the period, more than 640 days, by the huge bombardment and the huge bombing and the drones, something horrible, really, Sharif. And now, when I'm talking to you, I hear the tank shelters still falling over the Deir al-Balah southeast. And the casualties still come to the medical centers here in the Deir al-Balah, also in the Al-Aqsa hospital. So it's not unbelievable for us to accept this situation and to accept the silence from the international community. I hope to touch something very important. When they caged the southeast yesterday. They invade WHO warehouses and they jailed 3 of their employees, and they released 2 and keep 1 for the investigation to the Israeli forces. And they punished all of the people they gathered in the warehouses, the families of the employees there. And this situation is repeated actions from the Israeli. There is no discrimination between the civilians or any other things. So I mean, they need to normalize the world to accept this situation at all. No one can refuse these actions, and we can accept after that any solutions, like they're establishing a humanitarian city that they mentioned in their meetings before. And they need us to accept this idea. It's a very creative idea. They need us to show something like that. This is very creative. You can feed those people, and you can find solution for the refugee people. We, Sharif, we have reached 2 million and more than 400 members here in the society. So I cannot believe how can they deal with us with the little amount and the lack of everything that can come to the Gaza end, and we can stay alive here. This situation must stop now. We have no time to speak more about the famine. The famine is more aggressive than the rocket itself because it's spread widely. I hope you touch with me something very important with the statistics. There is no real statistics about the death of the famine because a huge amount of families here, they didn't reach a medical center that bring their relatives' bodies to do some procedures or formal procedures. A lot of people here, they ignore the reason for death because they is very busy to search about food and to search to displace to another safety place. So the statistics is not accurate. Something that I mentioned before, the missing people under the rebels, we haven't in exactly statistics because a lot of families is completely cleansing from the civil affairs here. No one from the first level of relatives can come to the medical centers and civil affairs offices and to register them as martyrs or casualties. So the situation is worse and more and more. We need to sending a human appeal that all the world must touch the Israeli need to normalize the world to accept the death by famine. I hope, Sharif, I reach my message to you.
Thank you, Ed. I mean, it's hard to even fathom what it's like in Gaza now. And as you mentioned, of course, the official death toll from the war, and these are just direct deaths from bombings and shootings, has officially, it's over 59,000. But that is acknowledged widely to be a vast undercount because so many bodies are missing under the rubble. And as you point out, it's almost impossible to know the number of excess deaths due to malnutrition and hunger and starvation because malnutrition affects everything, how you recover from a wound or how you recover from a sickness or whether you do get sick. And there are people trying to study this, but of course it's a very, very difficult situation. And as you mentioned as well with the fresh water, I read yesterday that the desalination plant in Deir al-Balah is within now the displacement zone, the new displacement zone. And so is it true that that is now inoperable? And another desalination plant in the north was recently bombed. So you're saying the situation of water is something that people aren't talking about, but is actually more of a crisis.
Yeah, Sharif, I think very important for desalination water station. Is the European Union to resupply the electricity for the only existence desalination water. Until this moment, from more than 7 days, nothing happened tangibly here. So they need to increase the suffering by let this desalination water station to stop completely without any hope to resuming the work and to supply. We have here in Deir al-Balah more than 84 camps that contains more than 180,000 people that depends over this desalination waters. So with the incursion, with the siege, with the suspending every lifeline, I can't imagine how we can stay alive to tomorrow or after tomorrow. So this is very important note after they announced a new agreement with the European Union, Sharif.
And just a final question, Eyad. I asked you, we published this piece yesterday where I actually end the article by quoting you. You said, "Damn this silence, damn this famine, damn it all, humanity has collapsed." What did you mean by that?
Look, as a father, I lived with my family and displaced multiple times, like other families here in Gaza. When I see all of the world just mention Gaza as a humanitarian appeal, and they say we stand with you, we touch really the public opinion in the world has changed a lot. We touch that as observers and as workers in the humanitarian aid distribution. But in the real case here, we need tangible actions. Until this moment, why I say something like that? Because there is no tangible actions. Just repeated statements in the media from all of the international community. Nothing here happened can stay us alive. And nothing happened really to push us to stand and have resilience to facing the occupation's actions here. When I touch my friends, maybe after 30 days from Khan Yunis, he worked with me as a colleague. He made touch. I didn't really recognize him because his signs completely differ by the sons, by the famine. So when I see his children also have emaciated bodies, really I cried. So I wrote these statements from my heart, from my soul. Really, the humanitarians completely collapsed. Even thought what they stay saying, we will support Gaza, even thought what's still happening without any humanitarian corridor urgently under the protection of all of international community, nothing here will happen. The Israelis falsely promises us and promises the NGOs and promises the European Union. And also we mentioned this a lot of time, but we need to repeat it. Maybe something will change in the world. And inshallah, we hope something will happen in the next few days, as they promised us multiple times before, Sharif.
Well, thank you so much, Eyad Al-Amawi, joining us from Deir al-Balah in Gaza. He's been on the program a number of times, representative of the Gaza Relief Committee and a coordinator for local NGOs. Thank you so much. We will continue to stay in touch with you. So I want to bring in Mouin Rabbani, the co-editor of Jadaleya, to continue this conversation. Mouin, you've heard just a little of what Eyad was talking about, and as we mentioned, Israel is now carving up Gaza even more with these military corridors. Last week, they boasted of a 15-kilometer corridor in the south that effectively cuts off Khan Yunis from Rafah. There's now this new one through Deir al-Balah, I think it's called Kisufim, that then will cut off Deir al-Balah from there. We already had the Netzarim corridor. The Philadelphia corridor was taken over in May of 2024 by Israel. So all of this is happening. We see this ramping up. We see the effects of the prolonged siege effectively since March. As predicted by many people, famine is now setting in place. Starvation is happening. Can you just characterize what stage we're at and what Israel is planning? Because there's supposedly talks of ceasefire, but those seem to be going nowhere.
Well, I think the most important takeaway from that very moving conversation with Eyad Amawi is that it appears that we're rapidly approaching the point where indirect deaths begin to outnumber deaths as a direct result of Israeli bombings and shootings. I mean, given what he said about many people not actually taking the trouble to go to Palestinian hospitals to report deaths from starvation, famine, and so on, because of the danger of doing so, we may in fact have already reached that point, but it's now going to accelerate rapidly. And regarding his last point, he's unfortunately entirely right. And if you look, for example, yesterday we had a statement by 28 primarily European governments insisting that the war must end. This was a deliberate statement to divert attention from their refusal to take any meaningful action to achieve the objectives they lay out. And they have all the leverage they need, all the means they need to more or less instantaneously bring about the objectives that they claim they're seeking to achieve, but they have made a deliberate policy choice not to do so. And their primary contribution in this entire genocide is to send weapons to Israel, to ensure that there are no meaningful consequences for Israel, to give war criminals indicted by the International Criminal Court free access to their airspace as they go to Washington to receive another hero's welcome, and so on. And when you look at the statement, my initial reaction was that for all its faults, the Trump administration at least had the decency and the honesty not to pretend to care. But these European and other Western governments, they put out a statement that they know is meaningless, that is basically designed as a sop to their public opinion to give the impression of actually caring, of actually doing something, while using that as a cover to continue with business as usual. Because, as I've pointed out on multiple occasions, Europe will never punish its favorite child. It sees Israel as arguably its greatest accomplishment since the Second World War, and will do anything and everything required to maintain its impunity, ensure it has no accountability for its actions. So what we're seeing now in the Gaza Strip is an intensification of the genocide by creating a situation in which indirect deaths rapidly begin to overtake violent deaths. And when you have famine, that a secondary impact designed to be so is social collapse. When you can't get a drop of water or a loaf of bread, it's in such situations that bring out not only often the best in people, but also people desperate to survive, desperate to ensure that their young children don't die of hunger and thirst. In such situations, society becomes increasingly atomized, and you begin to see features of social collapse. And this is precisely what Israel is seeking to achieve. Alex Deval, one of the leading specialists on hunger and famine, has pointed out that two precedents during the last 100 years for what is happening now in Gaza. One is the Nazi siege of Leningrad during the Second World War, and the other is what is known as the Dutch Hunger Winter in 1944, 1945. And he points out, yes, there have been many famines and so on in recent decades, but none have been as minutely designed and managed down to the smallest detail the way this famine in the Gaza Strip has been engineered. And again, these governments that signed this absolutely meaningless statement yesterday, everything needed to address and resolve the situation is sitting within spitting distance of the Gaza Strip, literally on the border and boundaries of the Gaza Strip. But Israel knows it can prohibit their entry because it knows that statements such as that made by the 28 governments yesterday were designed to divert attention and as an alternative to actually putting meaningful pressure on Israel to ensure that these goods and supplies can enter the Gaza Strip. And because of that, as I've noted, we're now rapidly approaching the point, may have already reached it, where so-called indirect deaths began to rapidly overtake violent deaths.
Yeah, and that statement that you mentioned, they say the war in Gaza must end now. That's a quote. They condemn the drip feeding of aid, the inhumane killing of civilians, including children, seeking to meet their most basic needs of water and food. So, powerful rhetoric, but as you mentioned, nothing to back it up. And I also wanted to get your take on the Hague Group meeting in Colombia earlier this month. It did seem to be a genuine effort to kind of bring some kind of international pressure on Israel to at least stave off or lessen the genocide, if not end it. But nothing that seemed to have come out of it. And there was a deadline given for September for countries to sign on to a statement. I think only 12 of 31 countries signed on so far. This is in 2 months from now. We're discussing a time when people are dying in droves from starvation and shootings and bombings every single day. So what's your take on that, and why do you think this pressure is not being brought to bear? What is the benefit, the actual geopolitical benefit to these countries? Isn't it being outweighed by these actions by Israel?
Well, two separate questions. Let me answer your second one first regarding the Hague Group. I think it's of enormous importance. The distinction between the Hague Group and this collection of Western governments who are just shooting statements into the air and seeing where they fall is that the Hague Group is a association, a coalition whose primary purpose is to put its money where its mouth is. In other words, it doesn't only make statements, but it then works around the clock to put its ambitions into reality. First and foremost, by demanding that its own members do what they claim they're seeking to do. And second, by seeking to expand the number of states and governments that sign on to their principles. The key difference, of course, the other key difference is that the Hague Group is a group that, at least at present, has much less influence in the international system than Israel's sponsors and allies. So unfortunately, we're not going to see any quick results, but chapeau to them because they are dedicated to making international law relevant, not just with statements blaming everyone else, but first and foremost by ensuring that their own members put their money where their mouth is. And this is something that they have already begun to succeed in, and that is their main efforts. Now, regarding your second question, different people will give you different answers. From my point of view, when I hear the German chancellor saying Israel is doing our dirty work, when I hear the British opposition leader saying Israel is fighting a proxy war on our behalf, when I hear all these Western leaders and politicians basically saying Israel is fighting our war on our behalf, I don't see the value in saying they're all pretending. Take them at their word. They see, rightly or wrongly, you or I or others may disagree, but they view Israel as a powerful proxy for Western interests in the Middle East. And all these statements, if Israel wasn't slaughtering Palestinians and Arabs there, we would have to do it ourselves. This is what they genuinely believe. There are, of course, other factors, but the bottom line here is that these governments collectively have decided that Israeli impunity is a core principle of their foreign policies. And if international norms and values, if international law, if international institutions, if these are in contradiction with Israeli impunity, they will resolve it not by ensuring consequences for Israel or accountability for Israel. They will resolve this contradiction by dismantling international law, by making international norms and values meaningless, by destroying international institutions. And it's not because Israel has some kind of unique hold on Western leaders or political systems. It's because they are genuinely committed to this agenda. I can't hear you.
Sorry, I had my mic muted. Just final question about the prospects for a ceasefire. We've seen back and forth negotiations between Hamas and Israel. Israel, and the US are presenting a plan that appears to allow Israel to get the remaining live hostages in a deal and then continue the genocide afterwards. There's no real clear things are being negotiated, but no real clear idea of where Israeli troops will pull back to in Gaza. It's certainly not a total withdrawal. And now what's become a major sticking point as well is how aid will be let in. Initially, the US and Israel insisting it'll still be run by the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, Hamas and other groups insisting that it be run by the UN and other groups. But it seems to be at a stalemate, and but at the same time, what my colleagues at Dropside are hearing from people as well is that Hamas is coming under tremendous pressure from within Gaza because the situation is so dire that people need any kind of reprieve, even if the long-term prospects are a continuation of the genocide. It's come to a point where, as we've been talking about, people are collapsing in the streets from famine. So what do you see as the prospects for a possible ceasefire?
Well, I can well imagine that most people in Gaza would be insisting that Hamas sign on to any agreement, even one that they know provides only a pause. I mean, if you're starving to death, you're not going to refuse breakfast on the grounds that you have no guarantee of dinner tomorrow evening. So that's an entirely understandable position. Having said that, and also confirming what you said, that there are still differences in the negotiating positions of Israel and the Palestinians in this issue, the main obstacle, as it always has been, remains the refusal of Israel to accept any agreement, not just an agreement different than the one that is on the table, any agreement. Now, there are two schools of thought about this. The first believes that the reason Israel is not accepting a ceasefire agreement is because Netanyahu is waiting for the Israeli parliament's summer recess, which starts, I believe, in a few days or about a week, because once parliament goes into recess, he can then sign on to agreements without having to deal with coalition problems or no confidence motion in parliament, because parliament will be on holiday. And these people also suggest that in view of what is seen by much of the Israeli public as an Israeli achievement in its war against Iran, that Netanyahu is now in a stronger position and more willing to accept such an agreement. That's one school of thought. The other says that when you look at Israel being able to continuously not only do whatever it pleases with total impunity and without consequence, but even to escalate to the point of not only a live-streamed genocide, but a live-streamed famine. And the world makes clear that it does not see any cause for concern, and certainly none for consequences, that it makes no sense from an Israeli perspective to sign on to a ceasefire agreement, even a temporary one, when it has so much leeway to do whatever it pleases. And I would just go back to Eyad's concluding statement about that humanity has collapsed. That's true, but I would add to that humanity has been destroyed. It has been dismantled by those who believe that Israel's right to mass murder, Israel's right to conduct genocide, Israel's right to engineer a famine outweighs international norms and values and international law and the laws of war and international institutions and so on. the Western states have taken a clear position on this. Israel über alles. Your sound is off.
Doing rookie errors. Well, thank you so much, Mouin Rabbani, for joining us. We'll have to leave it there.
Thank you.
Rabbani is co-editor of Jadaleya and former special advisor on Israel-Palestine and the International Crisis Group, joining us from Montreal. That does it for this live stream. We're here Tuesdays at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time. If you want to support our work, you can subscribe at dropsitenews.com. You can also make a 501c3 tax-deductible donation to our work by going to dropsitenews.com and clicking on Ways to Give. Make sure to follow us on social media platforms and let people know about our work. On behalf of everyone at Dropsite, thanks for joining us. I'm Sharif Kouddous.